Hello, I'm Max Alvarado and I'll walk you through this video on how to deploy a Nexus Dashboard cluster to enable the Nexus Dashboard Insights service. The video will consist of two parts, which correspond to the same process, but it is important to highlight the prerequisites and considerations of each of these sections. Initially, I'm going to show you how to implement a virtual Nexus Dashboard cluster, and later I'm going to show you how to enable the Nexus Dashboard Insights functionality. With the Nexus Dashboard 3.0 version, we receive some benefits. For this video, we are going to focus on the management of a single installer that includes both the core of Nexus Dashboard and the functionalities that we can enable, such as Nexus Dashboard Fabric Controller, Nexus Dashboard Orchestrator, and Nexus Dashboard Insights, which I will focus on this video. Before starting the installation process, let's remember some very important points. First, I'm going to use the version 3.1. For more details on the process that I will follow in this video, I invite you to go to the link corresponding to the Cisco Nexus Dashboard and Services Deployment and Upgrade Guide. However, before reaching this point, I hope you have validated that the version of Nexus Dashboard that we are going to implement has full support for the versions of your platforms, for which it is important to visit the Cisco Nexus Dashboard and Services Compatibility Matrix. And later, let us be clear that although we have three possible form factors for implementation, in this video I will be working on the virtual cluster option. For this, it is essential to have consulted the Cisco Nexus Dashboard Capacity Plan. For both tools, I attached the QR that will take you to these tools. We are ready. We are going to start the installation process. First, we are going to check the prerequisites to validate that we have the necessary platform to enable the nodes and then create the cluster. And then, we are going to deploy the OVA file. Some of the elements that are essential for enabling the platform are an NTP service, a DNS service, and communication with two network segments of the environment known as external networks, which are the data network and the management network. Here I highlight some of the reasons why we must enable communication with both networks, and remember that you will find greater detail in the configuration file. These are requirements specific to the operation of the cluster. Additionally, we must verify that we also have the necessary hardware and software resources to install the cluster nodes, which are indicated to us in the Cisco Nexus Dashboard Capacity Planning tool that we talked about previously. In this case, I'm going to implement a cluster of 3 app nodes that normally requires 500 GB of storage per node. However, as indicated in the configuration guide, when we are going to enable Nexus Dashboard Insights, we must modify this storage capacity to at least 1.5 terabytes for each functionality. Let's always remember to consult the configuration guide associated with the release we are installing. Let's start with the installation of the first node. In this case, I go directly to ESXi to create the VM with the .ova image that was previously obtained from the official Cisco software page. The wizard is quite clear in the process that we are going to follow, and we start by indicating that we will use an OVA. We select a name for this node and the file that we will use for its provisioning. Then, the data store that we are going to use. Remember that each node requires 1.5 terabytes and we will use 3 nodes. Then the external networks, data and management. At this point, we must select whether the type of node will be application or data, and based on this, the resources that will be consumed. Next, we select thick provisioning, since we want to guarantee the storage required by the nodes. And in this case, I'm not going to power on the nodes when they are created, since we need to make some adjustments before powering on. Now, we just review the indicated parameters and that's it. We start the process. At this point, all that remains is to wait for the creation of the node and then repeat the same process for nodes 2 and 3. For this example, all in application mode and with the same resources. Once the nodes were created, I will move to the vCenter to map the ESXi. I wanted to use both tools to cover both use cases, but just one is enough. Once we locate the nodes, it is essential to modify the storage from 500G to at least 1.5 terabytes. Remember that this is an exclusive exception for Insights, and we must do it on all 3 nodes. And now, we turn on the nodes. It is necessary to raise a node console in its boot process to configure some basic parameters. We just follow the wizard. We press any key, then provide the admin and rescue user password that we will then be asked to create the cluster. Then, the IP address for node administration, the gateway, and then we must indicate if this node will be the leader of the cluster. In my case, I usually use node 1 as the leader, but it is not mandatory that it be the first node. Just remember to have some of your nodes with this profile, since it will later be from which we will provision the cluster. We validate that the information provided is correct and let the process continue. After a few minutes, we will be shown the link through which we can enter the node's graphical interface to follow the cluster creation process. The process that we just executed in the vCenter for this node must be repeated for nodes 2 and 3. And once those nodes are ready, we can go to creating the cluster. The nodes were created with the required resources. We can now go to create the cluster. The first step is to access the GUI of the node that we define as the leader and enter the password that we indicated during its provisioning. We assign a new name, but now for the cluster, and we place the NTP, DNS, and, if necessary, the proxy. The latter is not mandatory. Next will come the mapping of the nodes for the cluster. However, let's remember that we need all the nodes to have connectivity in both the management network and the data network. So we must add the data network to the leader node of the cluster. Later, we are going to add node 2 and node 3 with their respective connectivity. In this way, we have completed all the steps for provisioning the cluster. However, now we must indicate the service or services that we are going to execute in this cluster. Remember, this is one of the advantages provided from version 3.0 of Nexus Dashboard. So let's talk a little about the services first. Nexus Dashboard allows us to enable provisioning services such as Fabric Controller and Orchestrator, or operation services such as Insights. In this case, I'm going to enable Insights. For the correct functioning of this service, there are a couple of requirements to obtain the information from the platforms to the clusters, and in turn, to enable the services in the cluster. Initially, we require the enablement of data network to the inbound network of each fabric. For this process, we will soon be sharing a video on how to configure the APIs for ACI to send information to the Nexus Dashboard cluster, so stay tuned. But to provision the Insight service components, we require the provisioning of persistent IP addresses, and the number of IPs depends on the type of fabric from which we will receive the telemetry, whether they are ACI fabrics for SDN, Nexus Dashboard Fabric Controller for NXOS, or switches in standalone mode on NXOS. This is mainly at the data network level. Now let's go back to the installer. We select the Insight service and we can add the persistent IP addresses in this step. As you can see, the installer includes information sections to understand the requirements throughout the process. We are going to add some IP addresses here and others later, so you can see how we can adjust this requirement once the cluster is formed. Ready. We can check the summary information of the installation process, and after confirmation, the process will continue automatically. First, the cluster bootstrap process is configured and then the cluster is installed. In both processes, we can follow the details of the installation step by step. And once completed, we enter the cluster that was enabled. A great strength of Nexus Dashboard since its version 3.0 is the simplicity of adoption from the moment of its implementation. From the first login, guides are shown that step-by-step indicates the functionalities of the sections of the tool, its services, and interpretation of the information. From this point, we only must follow the steps indicated in Journey, Getting Started. The next step is to know about the cluster. This is an informative section to familiarize yourself with the tool. Next, we'll add sites. But I want to show you the options we have in the menus provided by the platform, and I remind you that in the user guide you will be able to obtain more details about those functionalities. I'm going to go to the system settings to show you the parameters through which the platform was configured, and return to the persistent IP addresses requirement since it is in this section where we can modify that information. In this case, I'm going to add IP addresses in the data network block. Although we have already entered the cluster, there are processes finishing the enablement process. This is why in relation to this alert, we are going to see that the services that are being implemented were waiting for the persistent IP addresses in the data network. So we are going to see the impact of having added those IPs. Let's go to the software management section where the Insight service is being enabled, which as we can see is in process. From here, we are told the new functionalities of the version we installed and the details of enabling the Insight service. We can now consult audit logs and alerts related to the cluster enablement and operation process, and we are going to go back to where we added the persistent IP addresses. As you can notice, the alert has already disappeared, and now we see that the status of some of the persistent IP addresses of the data network changed to in use with the services that were previously indicated in the alert. And after a few minutes, the Insight service is also enabled and ready to go. Now, back to Journey, Getting Started. We were adding a new site. By selecting Tell Me More, we are told to define it as a site, and then we are going to register the new site. In this case, we will add a site whose controller is an APIC. We indicate the name or IP of the controller, username and password. Next, we assign a name to the controller to identify it and a global location. And that's it. The discovery process starts automatically, we just need to wait a few minutes. In the meantime, let's move on to the next step in Journey, Getting Started, which consists of a platform view. As indicated, we will be able to view the status of the cluster resources. As we can see, we have a cluster of 3 nodes and the nodes are healthy. We have one site mapped in ACI mode with active connectivity to the cluster and an enabled service, which is Nexus Dashboard Insights. At this point, we return to Journey, Getting Started, to find out what this version that we are running offers and find that the process was completed successfully. What's next now? Configure the Insight service, for which we have another section of Journey, Getting Started, but we will show this in a new video soon, so stay tuned. I hope this video is useful for you. Please leave your comments, questions, or suggestions. See you in the next video.